work that you do at the N-Star and all that kind of stuff.
I know we were just meeting on that. We keep getting asked to do things that we have fucking
Certain you have to say no.
Welcome everyone to the Lipstick meeting. We're going to get started now in just a minute. We are broadcasting. So everybody's mic was hot, but I didn't hear anything untowered, so good job. The bathrooms are wired for speakers, so you can hear anything during the board meetings if you have to run to the bathroom. Little trivia about Multnomah County boardroom. So I'm so glad to have everyone here in person. Thank you all for making the effort to be here. And I really do just want to start out by giving such a strong and heartfelt appreciation to Abby Stamp and the whole Lipstick team for all of the work. Just for all of the work of making this happen. It was like stretching muscles that haven't been used for almost 4 years of getting this set up. We were able to use this board meeting, which actually makes the broadcasting out to the public a little bit easier. So thank you so much for everyone here. And I know we have a couple people online, so thank you all for being here as well. So to welcome you to the November Lipstick Executive Committee meeting. I'm Jessica Vega Peterson, Multnomah County Chair, as well as the Lipstick Chair. And the meeting is being recorded. It is also being live streamed. And since we're in the county boardroom, it is going to be broadcast on the Multnomah County YouTube channel as well. So we're going to go ahead and have some introductions. What we're going to do is have folks who are on the executive committee introduce themselves. When we get to any kind of public comments or anything, for those of you who are community members joining us, if you're going to be participating, please just state your name before you ask a question or make a comment. That way we'll know, and the people listening online will know who's going to be speaking. I want to start, first of all, though, by introducing and welcoming Rachel Banks, who is here in her role as our new Health Department Director. We are so grateful to have you here. She's actually returning to Multnomah County. She first came to the county in 2002, left briefly to go to the state and get some really great experience, but now you have come home to the county. So thank you for your work that you did as the state's Director of Public Health, but also for the work you're going to be doing here, leading our department as well. I also want to recognize that this is going to be Lacayana's, Morgan's, and Roberts' final meetings as their term as community members on the committee comes to the end, as well as Judge Albright. So thank you, because your role as the Chief Judge is also coming. So I just want to thank everyone for their service. We are going through a process for getting new community members on there. There will always be community members, and we have folks who are going through that process again, but wanted to take a moment to acknowledge us. And Judge, thank you so much. And did you want to say a few words?
I was just going to say, our governance plan has our chief judges rotating. So I'm coming to the end of my term. We brought today Judge Greenlick, who will be replacing me. So he'll be our new chief criminal judge.
Well, welcome. Yeah, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And I just also wanted to take a moment just to thank all of the community members. I think the folks, the experience that you're bringing, the way that you ground the work that we're doing here in what is actually happening to people who are engaged in different ways with our public safety, our justice systems, and the work that we have to do has been invaluable and continues to be invaluable. And so I'm looking forward to continuing that type of conversation, but we just really want to thank all of you for the work and the role that you've had for the last years on the committee. So thank you so much. I also wanted to thank everyone for their engagement as we've been working on the new Lipstick process and how we're really trying to use the best practices, some of which Abby was able to bring home from the national conference she attended for Lipstick. So starting in 2024, we are going to be adding a new structure with a smaller executive committee. This group will still work and engage as part of the Lipstick Local Public Safety Coordinating Council. So this will be the coordinating council, but the executive team will be smaller. It will really be focusing on help do some more planning, driving the agenda of the subcommittees, really making sure that we're doing what we need to in terms of governance and helping spread the leadership so it's not just a chair who's making all the decisions. And so we are going to have the new smaller executive committee is going to kick off in February, and we're gonna meet in February and April, in lieu of the larger council meetings. So we're just gonna have a few months to kind of get used to that, and then we'll start doing these meetings again every month starting in June. So we'll have a meeting in January, we'll have a meeting in March, and then we'll have a meeting in April, and then, in May, and then June and July and so forth, but just a couple months as we're getting up to speed on the new executive committee meetings. So those were kind of my announcements about what we can look forward to in the months ahead, but wanted to give people a space, though, welcome, Justice. We'll give space for introductions. So again, we'll start with the folks in the room, and then we'll go to the people online, and Abby, I will start with you, and we can go around clockwise.
Good afternoon. Nice to see the pallor of your skin present and accounted for instead of just a bunch of boxes, so thank you for that. Yeah, and thanks, Christina, sitting behind me. We forgot what a terrible effort it is to throw a big meeting for a bunch of folks who haven't done this in 4 years. Thank you for coming back. Hello, Commissioner, thank you for joining us. And we're talking about doing a couple of these a year. So we will continue to utilize our new technical skills that we learned during the pandemic, as it's great to be able to zoom on into the meeting instead of having to schlep all the way over here. But thank you for doing this in person. It's good to see you all. Abby Stamp, she, her pronouns, Executive Director of the local Public Safety Coordinating Council. Commissioner.
Renee Gonzalez, Portland City Commissioner, Public Safety.
Bob Day, Portland Police Bureau.
Nicole Morrissey O'Donnell, Multnomah County Sheriff.
Mohammed Bader, Department of County Human Services Director.
Erica Pruitt, Director of the Department of Community Justice. I use she, her pronouns.
Kyla Armstrong Romero, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Juvenile Services Division Director with DCJ.
Everyone, Rachel Banks, she, her pronouns, Health Department Director. Tricia McGuire, she, her pronouns, Multnomah County Program.
Cheryl Albright, outgoing Chief Criminal Judge.
I'm Judge Michael Greenlick.
Alex Sanchez, I use he, him, or they, them pronouns, and I manage the Domestic and Sexual Violence Coordination Office.
Judy Matarazzo, presiding judge, Multnomah County.
Mike Schmidt, District Attorney, Multnomah County, use he, him pronouns.
Christina McGovney, she, her pronouns. I'm the Director at Home Free with Volunteers of America, Oregon.
Morgan Godman, she, her pronouns, community representative.
Vincent Jones Dixon, City of Gresham City Councilor.
Justice Chukwu, I am an advocate on the Crime Survivor Project Disability Rights Oregon. I use the pronouns he, him.
Thank you, and I forgot to mention, I use she, her pronouns, and we'll go to the folks online. Commissioner Stegman? Oh, thank you. Let's see. Grant, can you hear us? Hey, Grant, can you hear us? Can you introduce?
Yeah, I can. That's,
Okay.
That's Grant Harper, who is the Director of the Metropolitan Public Defender Office in Multnomah County, and the lovely Commissioner Lori Stegman, District 4 of Multnomah County.
Yes, wonderful. Sorry, we were having some audio problems. Commissioner Stegman, you will be very well aware of how we sometimes have those during the meetings. Great. Well, thank you so much for all of the introductions. I think this is a really, as we delve into the agenda, I think this is a really good topic for us to be in person for, to be able to talk about and share the ways that we are using our data collaboratively, what we can learn, and how we can use the data and metrics to really have a robust discussion around our justice system. And I think that this is a perfect way to kick off our in-person meetings again. I want to acknowledge that there can be a mistrust in data, which is why it's important to have these conversations, examine reports with a critical eye, and have transparent dashboards to the public. I mean, this is something that I know we're talking about public safety here, but this is something that for me is also incredibly important as we're talking about our homeless response system and other ways that our community is being served by the work that we do in government, is having access to data, using that data to make investments, but also making sure that we have reliable data and that we're being transparent with the information that we glean from the data. So we're going to be talking about that more in a bit, but I want to turn it over now to Abby to give a little bit of history about the data and the work with LPSC around that, and go ahead and get us started into the conversation.
And hopefully, ooh, that really does work. As you speak, just remember that there are folks tuning in, so you'll need to just grab a mic and pull it towards you so folks can hear you. So data. I'm thrilled that we're having this conversation again. I wanted to give a little bit of history about where we've been and where we are, not in terms of each agency and their own data efforts and data work. We will go to that next. But I wanted to bring some stories about where I've been over the past 10 years in collaborative data processes. So not just analyzing court outcomes. We're not just looking at arrests or other incidents as it comes to law enforcement. We're really, how do we take those different data sets across the entire criminal legal system and really analyze, does it work? Looking at how you join together court data with probation data, with incident data, which might not be an arrest. Having really deep ways of connecting data can help understand someone's journey, and then on a much larger macro scale, really help us identify from a longitudinal perspective, are we doing something that's working? What needs to change? And helping identify the different areas that can help us improve. So ever since I took over this position, something called DSSJ, or the Decision Support System Justice, is a data warehouse that was moved into the LIPSIC budget, I think in like 2012 or 2013. DSSJ, fun fact, is a data warehouse that was created with the same public safety levy funds that launched the planning and building of the now former Wapato jail. So that's how old DSSJ is, from I think the late 90s. And so what happened when DSSJ was moved into the LIPSIC budget, and then it turned into, wow, we really need to have a collaborative way of looking at data and making sure that those data are accurate and shared well. And it created this momentum that also have the data analysts work together across all of our agencies. And they're going to take the mic in a little bit as well. But we've had some challenges. So according to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Oregon State Police, the Local Public Safety Coordinating Council, as defined by Oregon statute, is not covered through CJIS, or Criminal Justice Information System law, so protection, which really inhibits the LIPSIC, while the data warehouse is in our non-CJIS protected budget, from having law enforcement data. So we really have a missing space. If we don't have arrest and incident information, we're really only having 2 legs of the 3-legged recidivism stool. We can only look at new convictions and new incarceration, not new arrests. And so we've had to use proxies and find other ways to make meaning when we don't have access to arrest data. And we know that the Portland Police Bureau has lots of amazing data folks who are really busy with lots of other things as well. And so what DSSJ contains are some data elements from the sheriff's office, some booking information, lengths of stay, release information, the district attorney's office for prosecutorial information, the courts, conviction and other sentencing information, and then some information also from DCJ on probationers. It's a great, fantastic tool. However, it has had some challenges which really show us where we need to actually have humans come together and share data sets together in a more robust way, because although DSSJ is really helpful, it is a limiting tool. For those of you who received the monthly automated jail longevity report, the Decision Support System Justice pushes that out, showing us every individual who's been in Multnomah County detention for 80 days or longer. And thank you, Judge, for making good use of that automated report. When I also took over LIPSIC in 2013, we used to produce a monthly public safety trends report. Lauren Brown, who is now over at the Bureau, ran that process where she would take information from DSSJ and show it to the LIPSIC Executive Committee. Here's all of the different trends. Here's what we're seeing. Here's, it's looking at years, and it looks at quarters, and then there'll be a year-end one. And that tool became outdated. We had it on the agenda every month. We talked about it every month, but there wasn't a lot of conversation or dialogue or questions. So whatever the tool had been, it was no longer useful. Then we were getting grants and had to report on a bunch of other things. And so we put that one by the wayside because it was the time it took to produce did not bear out the effort. And so that puts us in a position of kind of figuring out, okay, here we are again. We're going to talk about dashboards. Dashboards didn't exist well, we didn't do dashboards 10 years ago because government takes a second to catch up with the IT. But all of our public safety partners have dashboards. So our intent today is to share what each criminal justice agency has available to us as stakeholders and to the broader public as a whole, but then to also have a broader discussion about data, about evaluation, and about analysis. What are the things we as a council or you as a council are really interested in studying together and learning about along the way? And so how today's going to go is first, so the public, so Mike and the sheriff, you guys don't need to move anywhere. Christina is going to be our driver and just show your home pages and just so folks know where to find the information, what your dashboards are, just to give a couple highlights, just a few sentences would be great. And the reason that we are here today to also bring our analysts in the room, so I saw Kevin and David, a few other folks are here. We're going to have you, when it's your time to go over to the podium, you'll need to turn on that mic. Also, you press and hold the mute button to turn it on, to talk about the slide deck that was sent out. So there was a report that Chuck French created really looking at public safety and criminal justice systems here in Multnomah County. And there was an additional desire to add some context and understanding about some of the information that was presented. And that's what the analysts will come to do. So we're going to do a highlight of all of the data in the dashboards that's publicly available, have the analysts and the leadership really talk about that context, and then we're going to open the floor. Comments or questions before we start?
Thrilled to be having this discussion.
Fantastic. Okay. Let's go ahead and, so Christina's going to show, thank you. We created this homepage. You can navigate straight there from the LIPSIC main page as well. Criminal Justice Data Resources, and we're just going to go one by one. So Chief Day or DC Frome, I don't know if you were prepared for this bump, but Christina.
Click on it, we'll tell you.
Well, why don't we start by saying this is your open data, and if you could just take a few minutes into the mic and just describe what you have available, and so how people can understand what it is that they're going to be looking at. Thanks.
Yeah, so the Police Bureau has about 14 open data portals is listed here on that dash. And they vary from, our staffing numbers to what we're spending on overtime. I mean, pretty self-explanatory. If you want to look and see calls for service in a particular area, you want to see demographics, bias crime, stolen vehicle information, shootings, et cetera, dispatch calls, and really they're interactive. So if you click on one of those and then you want to see your neighborhood or adjacent neighborhood, what's going on, they're pretty available. But there's about 14 different categories that we try to have public facing that people can go to and refer to. And then there's explanations on how to walk through the dashboard when you're on it. So how's that?
That's perfect.
All right, there you go.
Great. We don't have, and do we have Gresham?
I can
Police? Do you
speak.
wanna take it?
Yeah, I can
All
speak to
all
that.
Thank you.
Do you want to, Morgan, do you mind sharing the mic?
Yes. Thank you. So pretty much echoing same thing that Chief Day mentioned, we've launched our dashboard probably about 4 or 5 months ago, and similar data. The main focus has been transparency and accountability. Another thing that we send or share on our dashboard is just use of force, our use of force data, our workplace diversity information as well, as far as the new hires, and then up-to-date crime and incident reporting data as well. We have an application that we use within the city, and we direct a lot of our community members to the application when they're if they're reporting incidents and crimes, because a lot of times BOA gets jammed up. So, and we launched that about 4 months ago. Thank you.
Sheriff? Oh, no, Mike.
Yep. All right. So we have a number of dashboards. Some of them we created in-house, and some of them we partnered with Florida International University, and we're one of a handful of district attorneys' offices around the country that have partnered with them, creating what they're calling the prosecutorial performance indexes. So nationally, like I say, we're about one of a handful, dozen maybe, district attorneys' offices, and we're all trying to measure the same things. Because one of the challenges is consistency of measurements across jurisdictions, and jurisdictions have different challenges and different things and inputs and outputs that are, different. But there are also some basic measures that we think prosecutors can look to as kind of best practices. I don't know if, Christine, you were going to click on any of those. So if you scroll down, you see this 4 tiles here. The prosecutorial performance indicators is the top left, and that's got about like 70 different dashboards in there. So you can really geek out at the number of different ways that you can look at things, anyway from who makes up our staff in terms of diversity of our staffing, to how quickly it is that we're contacting victims after our office receives a case, racial and ethnic differences in our prosecutions, all kinds of different things. So you can really spend a lot of time here. The other 3 dashboards are kind of things that we have found are really important to our community or have been really important to our community. So bias crimes, like police have bias crimes dashboard, so do we. And you can kind of see there how we're prosecuting bias crimes cases, gun violence, and then there's the protest dashboard, which was very popular some years ago, but probably gets less traffic these days. So, I think we are, I know that we are one of the most transparent district attorney's offices in the country in terms of the amount of data that is available, and encourage people to dig into it because it can really provoke some really good questions.
Okay, so the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, that's posted here, we have dashboards, monthly reports, and annual reports. I think there's a quarterly in there as well. We want to make sure that, given that a sheriff's office has multiple operations, from civil process to corrections facility operations to patrol and investigations, there is a wide variety of information. So we're trying to work on increasing some of the dashboards that we have in the information included here. The crime dashboard shows you can search by date, date range, the jurisdiction of Multnomah County Sheriff's Office, and then you can look at crime categories, and then it's also mapped out in color-coded to show any areas that might be seeing upticks. So this is publicly available, and we utilize this information to ensure that we know what's going on in each different community that we serve. The other report that we have that is more widely recognized and known in this group is the monthly jail stats report. And so that covers quite a bit of information from how many bookings that we have, average length of stay, always notes our capacity and where we're at percentage-wise, demographics. It's quite a lengthy report, but that is one of the reports that we use as partners in our county to determine where are we seeing some challenges that we can address as a collaboration, whether that's if we're seeing people that are staying in custody longer, or whether we're seeing people serving more sanctions or lengthier sanctions, just so we can start having the conversation to make sure that we have shared awareness and that we are all looking at the same challenges to try to address if there are any problems with that. And then the other couple of documents, we have an annual report for Prison Rape Elimination Act, which was established in 2003. So we put our annual reports there, and you will notice that they will be a year behind because it takes a very lengthy period of time to investigate and close out all of those cases in order to put that in a annual document. And then our force reporting control event reports are on that dashboard as well, and they are in the form of quarterly reports. And then there's a lot of information, glossary, so the report is really more easily able to be understood.
Thanks, Sheriff. Courts, Work and Judicial Department. I see Barb is sitting back there, if that would be helpful, or
Yes, I'm happy to jump in.
Barb, do you want to come?
grab a mic. Yeah, and Ken too.
Do I?
If you'd just like to click on the dashboard.
Just, what are you guys tracking? What's up there?
One of the things that is similar with the DA's office is our data is reconciled across the state, across jurisdictions, and so, you hear me there. The dashboards that we're linking to are statewide dashboards showing a variety of different measures statewide. So we collect our own data, but data entry practices throughout the state sometimes vary, and so that's where we have some differences sometimes. So the stats are pretty reliable here.
Great. Thanks, Barb. And Ken Sandrigan, welcome. Ken's the Executive Director of the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. Thanks for driving up.
Similar to the OJD, the data that we track is statewide data primarily. We receive data from LEDs, so arrest data, courts, so all of our circuit court data, and then also sentencing and supervision data from the Department of Corrections, and that's what really feeds into most of our dashboards. The primary ones I'll highlight really quickly. Most focus on our grant programs, and so they'll be more tailored to that specific area. So our JRP dashboard or our crime and incarceration dashboard. JRP is for our flagship grant program. Crime and incarceration is a little bit broader. You can see the general prison usage stats and others there. But like some of the others that have already spoken, we have bias crime information. It's mostly on bias hotline reports through the Department of Justice bias incident reporting system, and then also some of our classics that we've had for many years, recidivism and others. We also have traffic stop data that we administer directly at the commission as well, and that is all officer-initiated traffic and pedestrian stops are reported to us, and then we update those dashboards annually and are getting ready to do so on December 1st, and so all of the most recent fiscal year will be up as of December 1st.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.
And the only agency that we didn't have any dashboards on, DCJ. Erica, do you want to share?
I think I'm on. So we are having discussions about what dashboards we would like public facing. We have several dashboards, but you need to have certain permissions to get into our dashboards. And so we are having those discussions, and we're proud of the data that we do track, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on in this discussion, but that is the discussion that we're having.
Awesome. Thank you. Any questions, comments?
I appreciate everyone sharing the data. I'll just say, like, for me, especially as a former legislator, understanding that there's limitations in terms of the available data that LIPSIC has access to, that kind of, is a obstacle to having the full picture of what's happening in our justice system is a really interesting thing. And I don't know if I'm sure it's been brought up at the legislative level before, but that's just really interesting in terms of how are we able to access data, even from just a limited use to get the right information to be able to get that full picture, is something that I think is worth talking to other legislators about. I also am curious. I appreciate Erica, you talking about some of the things you're thinking about what you want to show. I'm curious for folks who do have dashboards. Are there things that are missing or things that you ideally would have, but maybe we just don't have we don't have a way of getting that data, or we just don't have a great way of showing that some of the things that happening. I feel like District Attorney, you have put almost everything possible on a dashboard somewhere, but I'm just curious for other folks from other agencies, what might be some wish list things that you have.
I think for us, as I was speaking of our large and varying organization, civil process is really important to ensure that we are responding timely, and these are very serious situations with respect to protection orders, and we want to make sure that there is in-house data that kind of drives, and we are able to evaluate that and determine what resources are needed. But that would be one area that I know I would like to see us continue. And that's what we're doing over this next year, is really to look at what are we missing in our dashboards that are public facing, and what should we be adding that's either monthly, quarterly. If it's not a dashboard that's interactive, where can we be adding a monthly, quarterly, or an annual report? Stop data was one of those. I notice he's not there anymore. But as we receive those reports, even from the state, we want to make sure that we're sharing those on our website and potentially the LIPSIC website as well.
I was just going to say that one of the things that we're really excited to be doing right now is we're going to be engaging in a gap analysis, and I think that this will be one of those areas that we explore very deeply within DCJ about, because what we put on those dashboards, we want it to be meaningful, and we also want input on what people would like to see. So I'm looking forward to that gap analysis and what will come out of that as well.
I'll just add, as I was explaining the challenge of having statewide data and operating practices in various courts leading to that data inconsistency sometimes, one of the things that Multnomah is obviously vastly larger than the other jurisdictions in the state. So a lot of the ways that they look at data is a little more granular than it would be to look at Multnomah's data. And so the context is often lost there. It's necessary that the data is reported statewide because we're funded in a statewide system. And so the stats need to be consistent statewide. But I think we constantly are looking at ways to provide the context and sort of some additional nuance about what happens here. So
We obviously listen to the community and put a variety of things on here that are community interest. We started a drone program, so we've got information to show where they're being deployed, when they're being deployed. We have new programs start up, as well as other ongoing incidents. But so people call up and say, hey, what about this? What about that? And if we have enough information to be able to provide, putting it up as dashboard number 15 isn't a problem.
Other questions that folks have?
I have just one thing. I just asked Barb this because it would have been embarrassing if I said this out loud and I just didn't know the answer. I know that the CJC and OJD collaborated to get a specialty court data system, and that now has been up and running for several years. And so I think that would be something I think would be fascinating. In Multnomah County, we have a lot of specialty courts. And having that case management data for specialty courts, mental health court, start court, step court. I mean, we have DUI, all these different things would be, I think, very instructive because I think a lot of us believe strongly in the efficacy of those programs.
I think that's a great idea. And I thought it was very lawyerly of you to not ask a question that you didn't already know the answer.
Commissioner, did you?
I did. So I think, Chair, going up a level from a policy perspective, and again, I want to reiterate the appreciation for us making space for this discussion. I'll start with an abstraction, and it's more of as a question. What are our shared goals and values as a community with respect to criminal justice? And what is our 1, 3, 5-year plan tied to those goals? And I phrase that as an abstraction because, many organizations go through a strategic planning process. There's always an interesting dialogue of how you do that in the public sector, where you have dynamics of elections coming every 2 years and new people are at the table that may have different perspectives than those that were at a table 2 years before. But I think that's a starting point because shared goals, shared value on what we're trying to do as a system that sort of maps to a strategic plan, potentially that maps to the dashboard you asked for. So you're asking for updates on how we're doing against this objective that ties to shared values and a long-term strategic plan. And I would observe that maybe there's some work that needs to be done at LIBSIG level is for us to articulate shared goals and values and refresh to reflect current, priorities that may potentially deviate from priorities from 2 years ago, and or at least make the space for that dialogue. And then second is that the relative performance of our community on criminal justice relative to other places in the state, other places in the country, and understanding, are we doing better? Are we doing worse? And how to meaningfully compare ourselves to, and certainly hearing from small jurisdictions relative to the city of Portland and Multnomah County, you're gonna have very different dynamics, very different drivers. But how do we benchmark ourselves? So that's trying to take it up a level and just looking at, what are the dashboards in furtherance of? I'm a believer in them. I think they have real value. And then just the last, tied to the first two, the shared values and how do we benchmark, but we are in a unique time in the city's history and the county's history. Public safety is very high in most voters' minds and most of our citizens' minds. And you look at historic data of where folks are concerned, criminal justice and core safety is right at the top of the list in a way it hasn't been for much of the last decade in our community. And how do we adjust to reflect that reality in how we define what success is? And going back 10 years ago, there may have been a very big focus on criminal justice reform, rightfully so. Many venerable goals there. Today, if we ask Portlanders what their number one priority is, of members of our county, what their number one priority is, it'd be interesting to try and calibrate, where we're focused, what we're reporting on to those interests. So I leave those kind of as open-ended, but that's what's on my mind on this.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I think this is a perfect table to have those conversations around shared goals. I think, I didn't grow up in Portland, right? I came from the Midwest. I lived in Chicago for a while. The level of crime that Portland had for I would say like 2 decades more than, was so low compared to other cities that you found across the United States. But having lived in East Portland for almost 20 years, it wasn't actually equal throughout the city, right? Like we always, ever since I've lived there, we've had gunshots in East Portland, right? I think what we've been seeing over the last couple of years is that there's definitely, along with COVID, we saw this nationwide, been such an increase. And I think the increase has been bigger here in Portland just because we were starting from such a lower level. I think that is important to recognize in terms of where the public is. I also think it's very important to recognize the long-standing impacts of our current justice system on people in our community, especially those who are justice-involved individuals, and disparities that we see there, and really the good, thoughtful, long-term collaboration that has been happening in terms of how we can do things in a different way that have better impacts than how we've been doing before, and recognizing that the work that we do at this table, in many ways we have influence on some of those things and not on all of those, which is one of the reasons why we have our health department director here, along with our DCA director and our sheriff and our district attorney, right? Because there are all these different levers that we have to do. I think having the conversation around those shared goals, though, is important because there is work that we can do at this table, and there's also work that we can do with other partners not at this table to reach those goals. And I do think that it might be worthwhile. I know Abby has been doing a lot of work with the reimagining justice, in talking about what are some of those outside ways that we can have influence on what people are experiencing in our community. So I think it's. I think you raise a good point, and I think that's a worthwhile discussion to have. And we need to, also recognize what we can do here, and where we can be having opportunities to bring people in. Justice.
Yes. So, is this the mic?
Yes, that is the mic.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So speaking of public safety, I'm concerned about thefts in stores, grocery stores, and other, stores that have been locked down now because they can no longer operate due to thefts. And I think it's an issue that we need to look into, because once those stores keep shutting down or locking down, it increases the chances of unemployment, and thereby going back again to increasing crime. So I think since we're talking about public safety, we may want to look into that aspect of our community. Yeah.
Go ahead. Somebody else?
Oh, I was. Oh, sorry, Erica.
No.
Erica, go ahead.
No, today.
I can't see you. I can't see you to my left, so go ahead, Erica.
No.
I know, we don't have a raised hand function.
Yeah. Yeah. I know, we're used to Zoom, right? One of the things that I think is really interesting too, and you said it very well, Chair, is that, we've got the health department, we have DCHS at the table, and we also invest a lot in our community resources. And I think, when we talk about the data, I think we're all invested in seeing the disparities go down. We're invested in seeing the crime rates go down. And something that I'm always interested in, and Jen Rourke, Dr. Jen Rourke, our research and planning manager, one of the things I've asked to prioritize is, as we do our work in DCJ, how can those recidivism rates align with the investments that we're making in the community resources. And so I think that would be something that I'm very interested in. And then I think that there's a huge gap, just because I failed to mention it, which is, the revocation data, and really understanding, the decisions that we make recommendations in DCJ, and then there's actual decisions that are made in the courts, and being able to align that so we can continue to look at our guidelines and make sure we're calibrating and making sure that the right people are going into jail or having community responses.
Thank you. Well, we'll go to Chief Day, and then we'll go to you, Judge.
Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciated both comments from the commissioner and from the chair. And I agree, I think Portland's a relatively safe city for many, many years. And then we've seen this significant increase. And also going back to my time prior with Lipstick and the hard work of Abby and others, definitely an investment and an awareness around those impacted by the system, and understanding that and looking for ways to mitigate that harm, I think, are all critical. But to the commissioner's point as well, I think we're hearing loud and clear from the victims in this conversation that I think sometimes has been left out of the data and the information in the conversation, that is a pivot from where we've been in the past. And not just victims of crimes directly, but the collateral impact of that, as mentioned just a minute ago about retail theft and seeing the stores that are closing, which then cause food deserts, pharmacy deserts, et cetera, because of those actions. So I would really want to see us going forward, certainly having an awareness, continued awareness and passion around justice for all those impacted by the system, including the victims and those. And I think, even as we look at the data, there's sometimes can be lost in that conversation. I want that to continue to be highlighted.
That's an important piece. Thank you for raising that, Chief Day. Judge?
I would like to see us concentrate a little bit on education of the public, because it's concerning to me that there's lots of different viewpoints, which is a good thing, and data is great, but you can pull data to show anything you want it to show in some respects. And for example, if you were to look at our court data under felonies, it may show that it's the same as it was in 2019. What it doesn't show is we didn't break out murders. So murder cases are substantially higher now than they were in 2019, and they're more time consuming. So I think we have to be careful when dealing with data, because data can be used in lots of different ways. And this was drilled home for me last week in a court hearing in which a juror said to me, well, you may think that there are facts, and in your day maybe there were facts, but there are no facts to me. It's whatever anyone chooses to believe. And if that's the perception, that's pretty hard to gain some trust at here's what the data says, here's what we're doing. And I think public trust is probably at an all-time low. So to the extent that we can, in some way, shape, or form, use Lipstick as an education space to tell people, here's what all of this data is indicating, as opposed to simply throwing data at the wall and hoping it sticks to show whatever we want it to show. Because I think the context is so important, and sometimes in discussion of data, the context isn't there. And at least for the court data, ours is statewide, and because of that, you have to be really careful what you're pulling out and that you know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you could come up with a completely different perspective by looking at the same sets of data. So education to me, and public education, is really important.
I think that's a good segue.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
And the National Institute of Corrections, about every decade or two, renews their guidelines for effective criminal justice coordinating councils, which Lipstick is a brand of that. And one of the key components, in addition to having a real executive committee, Your Honor, is public education. So that is something I would love to work with you all on, how we get out of our office and really engage. And, because a lot of times we're all the system, but we all look at each other, we're really different. We own different pieces of this puzzle. Morgan.
I sometimes work as a freelance journalist, and just piggybacking off that, there's the phrase, if it bleeds, it leads. So the media absolutely loves crime stories, but it's often portrayed with devoid of context, just like the judge said, and I think that is such an important component. Where does the public education also intersect with our role when speaking to media? And sometimes offering that context, like the comment on victims, often portrayed as this dichotomy, right? There's perpetrators and then there's victims, but actually, like, people experiencing homelessness are incredibly at an elevated risk of being victims of crime. And I feel like people think that a lot of the crime occurring in our community is random, and it's absolutely not. Certain people, marginalized people, are more likely to be victims than everyone else. And that's just something I've been thinking about as a journalist.
Thank you. I would love for you all to keep thinking along these lines and how you would like to use this space and our collaborative relationship to advance what questions we want to be asking, what are the data that we have that are better reflective of whether, the victim is a Walmart or a victim is a person, or, is there a way to, what's the information we need to be able to be better policymakers together? So keep thinking while we pivot.
Before we pivot really quick, Abby, I just wanted to say that I just would be remiss if I didn't mention that there's also juvenile data. So we've been talking a lot about the adult data. I know Annie E. Casey through the JDAI initiative is tracking data locally here in Multnomah County. So I just want to make sure that we don't miss juvenile data in this conversation.
Absolutely. While our data analysts, so I see David, I saw Kevin somewhere, and Jen, I heard her name, Dr. Rourke, there she is, and Ken, we've got a podium set up there for you. And I don't know who from the Bureau is going to walk through the one slide that Lauren and Christian helped put together. I don't know if that's Chief or Deputy Chief, or we could.
Rock, paper, scissors for it.
Or, not it. And Christina's going to bring up the slide, but this was, I'll set the context. As I mentioned when we launched the meeting, taking a close look at the metrics report that was generated, and really wanting to, so all of the criminal justice leadership met and really wanted to add some important context and background, because without that, some of the information was either inaccurate or misleading, and just wanting to make sure that it is on the record and corrected in this space. But I want you to please hold on to those thoughts about data on a bigger scale. But we wanted to make sure that we, before the end of our meeting today, got this in front of you all. It should have been emailed to you if that's too small, or if it's a little bigger behind you over here on this side or in front of you guys. Want to go through this. It's just, I think, 5 or 6 quick slides, and then we're going to move on and finish out this meeting by closing out the rest of this conversation about data. So please be thinking about what's important to you, and what else should we be looking at or studying. So, no one got up. So, David, Jen, Kevin, where is? Yeah. So there's some chairs over there, and I think so. Chief, I guess you're up first.
Yeah.
Yep. So the introduction and background you all can read on your on the deck that was sent out, and just showing the real collaborative nature of everybody working together to do this. And Chief, you're welcome. Just talk from your spot. But I think we got everybody, and Ken too. Awesome. Thanks.
Right, so are we going to show that slide, the law enforcement staffing slide? There you go. So in general, the points outlined here are consistent. I mean, obviously, they're provided by our Bureau, so makes sense for me to agree with them. And we have, just to be frank, so we have seen, an increase in crime and disorder. We have adjusted some of our divisions and units to meet that. We are seeing fewer cases referred forward for prosecution for a variety of reasons, largely because of that lack of staffing and response. When I read this, my attitude was, and somebody reminded me of this past week, is that, the windshield's bigger than the rearview mirror for a reason. And I really, I see this and this report, and I understand the importance of the significance of it. But my attitude coming in here 6 weeks on the job after 4 weeks on the beach is, I know that we organizationally, but we as a community can do better. We've been better, and we could do better. And as I read this and look at this, I really am interested in sort of more about what's next versus what's been happening. And not that we don't have to understand and learn from the past and learn from the data. So, these numbers and these bullet points certainly lie here and be paying attention to. But I'm really interested in where we're going to go from here instead of trying to figure out, why it is that led us to this point. Not that I'm ignorant to that. That's kind of what I wanted to just cover in terms of, versus getting into the detail. I'm happy to take questions later, but it's pretty succinct and pretty clear. And I want us to be continually striving for how we can do better, because I think the city and the county can do better as a whole, as well as the police bureau. And as the chief of the police bureau, I'm committed to that.
Thank you, Chief. So, Kevin, thank you. And so there's power buttons, the one on the right, on the mic, yep.
Let's just switch.
Oh, there it is. It was hiding.
You're on.
Yep. Oh, Rachel, she's coming. She's right here.
Good afternoon. Kevin Morelli, the Planning and Research Manager with the Multnomah County Sheriff's Office. Our slide, or our component of this, is just really an overview of jail utilization. And so it was kind of an acknowledgement of our funded jail capacity per capita, 139.5 per 100,000, and an acknowledgement that has gone down over the years. And that's really reminiscent of kind of the philosophy of the local criminal justice system and the move towards rehabilitation as opposed to incarceration. And then just some discussion of our average daily jail population. And the key takeaway here is that it fluctuates quite regularly. Our jail population, for the most part, really is comprised of people who come in, the duration they stay with us, and then how often or how frequently they go out the door. And so as staffing levels on the streets change, as crime on the street changes, as policing philosophies change, if we move towards citations in lieu of arrest, our jail population is going to be reflective of that to a certain extent. And one of the things, if you wanted to look at the jail population or a jail metric that is closest to something that would be indicative of activity in the community, it would be our standard jail bookings. You could find that on the monthly jail status report that the sheriff had discussed earlier. And so you can see that with the start of the pandemic, our bookings, our standard bookings dropped drastically, and that is a direct reflection of kind of the policy changes and philosophy on the street. However, do note that for the most part, our jails do not have metrics that are going to provide you a really good picture of activity in the community, and that's just because not everybody comes to us. Not everybody gets arrested. They don't get booked. They're cited. They're released. There's discretion. So we're really, just kind of the housing authority in some respects, and we have limited control over who comes to us and how long they stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. Let me move this up. I'm David. I'm a research analyst with the DA's office. And I'm just going to go over a couple of findings that were included in that Justice Systems Metric report. The DA's office featured fairly prominently in that report. And we take issue with a lot of the arguments that are made there, both in terms of the methodologies that were used, but also in terms of the conclusions that were drawn. So I should say my colleague, Kyle Schwab, wrote a fairly extensive review of this report. And it's basically his work that I'm drawing on right now, and he also created these slides here. But the major theme I think we're going to focus on is the report's contention that DDAs are filing fewer cases and that case issuance rates are declining despite the fact that referrals from law enforcement have been relatively stable. So the evidence that the authors cite for this argument is that the total number of case filings have been going down for the last few years, and the case issuance rates have been going down as well. So let's take a look at that. So that first blue line you see in this chart, that is the total number of misdemeanor cases that are filed per year. You can see it drop fairly precipitously in 2020. That yellow line there is the total number of felony cases that are filed per year. So yes, they are both going down, but what the report doesn't make explicit is that we can only file on cases that are referred to us by law enforcement. So obviously, if we don't have referrals, we can't issue the cases. So those gray bars there represent the total number of cases that are referred to us by any law enforcement agency per year. And you can see they drop very precipitously in 2020, and they pretty much have not gone back to where they were pre-pandemic. One caveat, of course, is 2023 isn't over yet, so those numbers there will go up. But you could also infer that the vast majority of this change is because we're not getting as many misdemeanor referrals. That blue line has gone down, I think, 59% since 2019. That yellow line has only gone down 8%. So next slide, Christina. The other point we wanted to address was the case issuance rates. The authors state that our case issuance rates have been going down precipitously for the past few years. That is not accurate. The way they calculated case issuance was that they took the total number of cases that are filed in the circuit court, and they divided that by the number of arrests that law enforcement agencies reported to the FBI. And you can see why that might be a problem, right? Arrests and cases filed aren't exactly the same thing, so you can't just divide those two numbers together. The appropriate way to do it is what we do on our website. We take the total number of cases that we filed, that are issued, and then we divide that by the total number of referrals we get from law enforcement. And when you do that, you get the real number. So that blue line there is the percentage of cases issued for misdemeanors. So in 2023, I can't actually read the number. So so it's at 65%, and that's the highest it's been at least since 2016. That yellow line there are felony cases, and it's at 78%, which is the highest it's been on record, or at least going back to 2015, what we have in this chart. So yeah, I hope I've kind of clarified things in terms of yes, in a very literal sense, the number of case filings have gone down, but what's actually true is that case issuance rates are very comparable to where they were pre-pandemic, have even gone up in certain instances, and the reason the total number of case filings are down is just because we're not getting as many misdemeanor referrals for the most part. So thank you.
Mike, DA.
I just wanted to add one thing to what David said, and it kind of touches on the chief's numbers. Our issuance rates are not also just a reflection of what we're doing in the office. It takes a partnership. And so working with police officers, sheriff's deputies, agencies across our community, when you see that our issuance rates are going up, that's because we're working together and getting cases where we're getting the evidence that we need to have successful prosecutions. So while it's a stat that we can measure internally in our office, it's reflective of collaboration and partnership with our law enforcement partners who are bringing us cases that are issuable and are good. And so when I see these numbers going up, I think that's good evidence of our deputy DAs working closely with PPB, MCSO, going to roll calls, talking about evidentiary needs, case law changes, things of that nature, so that they make sure that they're getting us the cases that we can prosecute. So it's like it measures us, but it's also measuring the partnership.
I appreciate that, Mike, and I also want to highlight that there's multiple references in the report to the police not being able to provide enough cases and so forth, and I just think we want to be careful in that messaging, certainly organizationally, that we don't want to also just flood the system unnecessarily, right? There's sort of this, the police haven't, essentially you can read between the lines. If I were to personalize this, say, well, the police haven't been doing their job, so therefore we don't have as many cases. There's some of that messaging. It's not explicit. I know it's not meant that way, but essentially the way it reads to me on first blush was, well, the police aren't doing their part, so that's why we don't have as many cases. If the police did it more, et cetera. I think we want to be careful in terms of how we communicate that to the community when we talk about data and we talk about numbers, and recognize, the entirety of the context of what we're talking about, not just police, not just DA, not just parole and probation, not just the courts, public defenders, et cetera, that it's a more collaborative approach, and that, you know, some of these barriers and challenges the police are facing are not just around staffing, but also around the messaging directed towards police and what the community wants and expects for them, which right now, I can tell you in the short time I've been in this role, is people want more police presence, they want more enforcement, they want more action, they want to see us really being attentive to these needs, which could change these numbers over time, but I just want to be careful about how we quantify this as a whole versus sort of trying to, and not that it's being said directly, but that, you know, just the fact that police don't refer as many means we don't have as many cases.
And Chief, I somewhat a catalyst for this discussion, so just to provide some context, I think, well, two quick observations here. I think the author of the original slide deck, I think engaging with some of the analysts in a public forum would be helpful. I think that maybe is another step in this process. Just to compare notes, where do we agree and disagree on the underlying assumptions? I think the critique with respect to police was primarily a question as to whether there was an inadvertent strike going on inside the police department. And without really weighing in on my opinion on that, that was, just to be clear, if I was to read the author's sort of takeaway, it was that was there some sort of less urgency because of frustration inside the police department. That was the editorial I read in it. That's not necessarily the way the data it clarifies one way or another. And I'm not sure I agree or disagree. I'm just sharing what editorial I got out of it.
Next up, we've got the courts. I don't know who, if Barb, can you pinch it for us?
Yeah, I think so. We unfortunately don't have a data analyst, and that dawned on me as I was trotting across the bridge to get here. So, but basically, I think if memory serves, the report that came out indicated that there was a large backlog from the court due to the courts having been closed for a couple of years during the pandemic, and I think that's what we really wanted to provide more accurate data about. The courts weren't closed, but due to the restrictions on the number of people that could be, you know, in any one place, it did restrict how many types of proceedings we could hold. And so we did have cases that were pending, but we have really worked through those pending cases in the years 2021 through 2023. So the length of time that felony cases and misdemeanor cases have been pending has declined dramatically. So we don't have a big backlog of cases waiting. So that's not an issue that's driving current rates. The other thing is that we're holding trials at a rate that is similar to, if not higher than, what we faced pre-pandemic. So we're holding trials as much as we ever did in terms of both bench trials and jury trials. So those things, there isn't a pending backlog in those numbers. Let me just see if anything else jumps out at me that would be. Judges, anything else that you think I need to explain?
Thank you, Barb.
Yeah, I think that does it.
Okay. Next slide is CJC.
Thank you. So the CJC contributions to this PowerPoint were made by Kelly Officer, who is ill and could not be here today. And so that's just my way of saying that if I don't cover everything that she would have, or if you all remember things from your meetings, please pipe in. But what we were asked to do primarily with this group is to try to provide some statewide context for what's happening. I think, as was mentioned earlier, Multnomah County can oftentimes be a driver in what we see across the state, but then also there is the rest of the state as well. And many of the patterns that we've seen, whether it was in the report that was authored or just taking a step back and thinking of what we see at the state level in crime trends more generally, many of the patterns that we see in Multnomah County are mirrored across the state. And so the first slide that we have here shows the prison population trends for the male prison population across the state, essentially since CJC has started to measure these trends. And there's lots of different lines on here. We try to look at many different interventions over the years that have been designed, some specifically to reduce prison usage, such as justice reinvestment and others. But you will notice that the largest dip obviously occurred around COVID. That was due to a significant decrease in prison intakes. Contrary to some popular belief, it was not driven by Governor Brown's commutations, may have been accelerated by it, but for a long time, we had a steady state of intakes at around 400 per month across the state. You could almost set your watch by those intakes, but then they plummeted during COVID. They still have not rebounded. They are about 350 per month as of our last prison forecast group when we came together and we talked about this. But we do see that increasing from the low point in COVID. And so we see, at least from a forecasted standpoint, from October 2023, a forecasted increase over time. And that's what we're noticing, whether it's measuring justice reinvestment within Multnomah County, within many of our counties. We do see this rebound, though not to pre-pandemic levels at this point. We'll go to the next slide as well. These are almost a little bit out of order. This is data from our traffic stop data collection program. This is data collected from our Tier 1 agencies across the state, which is any agency with 100 or more officers. That's 11 agencies, but it's Multnomah County, PPB, OSP, Marion County, those types of agencies. And what you'll notice is this really squares quite well with what Chief was mentioning. First of all, we saw, or we hear from across the state that as police departments and sheriff's offices are facing the staffing challenges they're retooling, whether that's redeploying officers away from traffic enforcement to other types of enforcement or closing those teams altogether. Much of that started with COVID. There was a pretty significant drop. You can almost perfectly map on the traffic stop drops to the different waves that we were facing in COVID. And then that continued on after the passage of Measure 110 to where you'll notice, at least in our Tier 1 agencies, that while we started with around 30, between 30, 35,000 stops originally, we have yet to, or just about rebounding back to 30,000, so we've still not reached pre-pandemic levels. And that's true even beyond these large agencies. When we look at our Tier 2 agencies, there was actually even more precipitous drop during COVID, and by Tier 2, I mean any agency with 25 or more officers. And so by the time you've included all those together, we're talking about the largest 60-odd agencies across the state displaying very similar patterns that we've seen. And those are the slides that CJC presented, so I'll turn it over to whoever's next.
Thanks, Ken. Jen, taking us home.
Hello, all. I would just thank you, Jen Rourke with Department of Community Justice. I would just like to remind you that by the time that probation comes into this, the stage of this game, oftentimes our numbers are affected by arrests, by the courts, by sentencing. So really, we don't, as an agency within the criminal legal system, have a driver on how to, which is a good thing, on the numbers. All we do is receive who we receive and do our best to hopefully beneficially impact their lives. So I believe this report, what they did was, thank you, Ken, they took the numbers off of the CJC dashboard because as we talked about earlier today, DCJ does not have any public-facing dashboards. That is an ongoing discussion that we are working with internally to decide if we should, what should that be, and what is the best way to do that. So as you see, the numbers, as the report said, has decreased dramatically. There are several reasons for this. Obviously, the main one is ballot measure 110. We see COVID. We see the public defender crisis. We see all of these things impacting whether or not a person is going to end up on supervision. And then we also see, while they're on supervision, some legislation that has impacted them, such as EDIS, the earned discharge. And that is changing in January, actually, to make it more easy to have earned discharge. And earned discharge basically says, if you've been on probation and you've done what you're supposed to do, including engaging in treatment and making restitution payments, then you can be eligible to be released earlier on your probation at half the length. That's changing in the sense that there were a set of crimes that prior, I'm not going to try to remember the date because I'll flub it, I think it was 2013, restitution had to be paid in full. The new stuff is saying that you just have to be on a restitution payment plan, which will probably make more people eligible for earned discharge. And then there was an increase in defendants being sent to prison. So if defendants are being sent to prison, they're not being supervised in the community, they're being supervised in prison. So really, what was experienced by DCJ was led by all of these factors outside of DCJ. When we look at, are the trends going to return? I know statistically we had a, who just went to the health department, one of our best statisticians. Yes, you're welcome. We did a big trend, and we didn't see, unless there was any major legislation coming up, like the repeal of 110 or some other things, that there would be a major increase in people under probation. And then the other thing, too, is just to keep in mind, probation, again, is at the tail end. So when we think about what is success keeping people on probation, or is success people successfully exiting probation and going and reintegrating into their community? So for us, it's not really a good thing to have a lot of people on probation. We want to have those high risk, high acuity people that need to be supervised, and then we want to give services and service brokers to those low-risk populations and send them on their way so they can go back and really be community members. I think that's it. Any questions for me?
Any questions for any of the analysts? And thank you all. Came together really short order, did a monumental task. Thank you so much for your work on that. Mohammed, please.
I don't have a comment, but thank you. One thing I noticed that some of you may know, I managed protective services for over 10 years, and I'm not sure where is the data on elder abuse, and or whether you want me to compile that data for you, but it would be great to kind of look at that, and also if there's any data on domestic violence. And I'm happy. I think, appreciate, Chair, you mentioned that it takes all of us, and so that's what I can offer from the Department of County Human Services, is that we do a lot of work in this area, and especially in elder abuse and financial elder abuse that I can provide if needed.
Yeah, I just have a comment, and it sort of piggybacks off what we said before, just operating on a shared reality, a shared set of facts. I see so much just broad misconceptions about the justice system from the public. And all this data is amazing, people, creating these dashboards. But, criminologists broadly agree the number one crime deterrent is the certainty by which you'll be caught, and that the length of the sentence matters very little. And, right, I'm not making this up. But if you read the...
Yes, timeliness and certainty. That's why you put a police car on the side of the road, people slow down, because there's going to be an immediate response with an immediate action. It's not the severity of it, it's those two components that deter people.
Exactly. And I feel like, starting with Nixon's war on crime, we were sort of propagandized to believe that we need, tougher sentences and harsher sentences, and you still see that if you read the comments on social media, which I do for you so that you do not have to do, or on local media stories. And so I just feel like that's a really important point as we're going forward, to just include that context, that it really, making the sentences more harsh will not actually deter crime, and the number one thing we could do to deter crime would be increase our case clearance rate. So really looking at that and supporting them to achieve it.
Justice.
Yeah, I also want to echo my appreciation to the presentations on that shows the data of crimes, and also I would still want to emphasize the need to provide more data on victimization, particularly on the disability community, especially the developmental disability people in group homes. So I think it's also very important, and we would appreciate your support from Disability Rights Oregon in doing that.
Thank you, Justice, and I appreciate that. I appreciate you raising that point. I think it's also interesting to think of, I know when the pandemic was beginning on the Board of Commissioners for the county, we had conversations about the investments that we were going to make based on what we were anticipating we might see in our society because of the impacts of the pandemic. So obviously, investment in mental health, right? Especially mental health for youth. But we also knew that domestic violence would likely go up, child abuse might go up, elder abuse might go, right? And so we were trying to make those investments. And so I really appreciate the conversation today. I really appreciate all the work that went into bringing all of this different data pieces together, because I think it is like, it has to be that holistic view of who are the victims, who are being impacted, but also how we in each of our systems have to be working together to respond to it, and being very real about what's happening. And that's where I think the data can be such a powerful tool. It's like, we have to be real about what's happening. We can't, nobody here is trying to ignore the fact that, like, we are seeing an increase, we had seen an increase in crime go so much higher than anything that Portland had experienced before, and that we also want to, check the data and make sure that in the context of where we are today, we are talking about the same thing and have that shared understanding. So I really appreciate that. I want to open it up for anybody who might have any last questions, any comments, any things to share on the data pieces. I think we can talk a little bit about where we go from here, but just wanted to open it up and leave space for folks. Well, thanks again to all the data analysts who were hard at work putting all this together. Oh, Sheriff? Oh, please go ahead.
Well, it was more about where we should, or consider as we leave today and where we should go. All of us have a lot of data to share on what's happening in our respective systems, and we're trying to pull that together to impact the justice system as a whole, as well as supporting the voices of our community, our victims and survivors. And there's been a lot of really valid points around the information we're sharing, but perceptions and what's really happening in our community and how that's impacting our community members. So where this group has been successful is, as also mentioned earlier, is choosing some goals or some areas that we really want to make an impact in the system as a whole, getting our resources together, using our data resources, and identifying what is that. Is an example of that people who are repeat people in our system, whether that is people that are justice involved, are they high utilizers of emergency rooms, are they high utilizers of all of our systems? And I think it's really important that not only are we just sharing data out, that we're able to look at some common challenge, collaborative challenges that we see across our system, and working on those together so we can start to look at where are we today, how are we making these improvements, and are we seeing any impacts of the changes that we have made or the refocus that we have to certain issues. And I think that's been challenging as I've stepped into this role, is looking at, there's a lot of resources, but how are we utilizing those resources to make the largest impact for our community to feel that we have a safe community for everyone, looking at the impacts of our justice system from beginning to end, where can we intervene in individuals that are either justice involved or utilizing multiple systems here, as we have all of our system partners at these tables.
And that was a wonderful way to start off and talking about next steps, and that really, I think, reflects what I feel and what I think a lot of people feel around the good that can do from this table. I will say we have three main things. We have to, this group has three statutory things, the juvenile correction plan, the community correction plan, and we have to approve grants,
Specialty courts,
and specialty courts, right? Like specialty courts, and so we go for the grants. I mean, that, it's such a small scope, but the potential here can be so much. So I think again, this was a great topic to have a first in-person meeting. I think that really helped drive some really good conversation and sharing today, but I also think it's a really good jumping off point as we're looking at this next year. And for me, having a broader group to be talking about what do we want this direction to be, how do we want to use this time over the next year to really have that strategic plan of things that we want to be working on, collaborating together as we're doing some of our work as well. So I just want to open it up to folks of as we've reflecting on the conversation today, what resonated or what is inspiring you maybe for work that we can take up or work you'd like to see us do going forward.
I was going to say that, it's been interesting listening to this whole conversation and seeing the data and hearing the comments around the table. And so I've heard a couple of things, in DCJ, the things that we're invested in is we want to reduce jail beds. We want to make sure that people can get off of supervision when they are making positive changes in their life and not languishing on supervision. I've also heard talks about, victims and protecting victims in multiple different areas, and then talking about what are those like deterrents of crime. And I guess one of the things that I think that we all could say is a shared goal, and I think it's important to say, is that we want crime to be reduced in our community. And so what are those drivers that get us to that point? What are those shared, as Commissioner Gonzalez was talking about, what are those shared values that we have around that, and what things are effective in moving us in that direction? I think that's the conversation that I would like to see us having. I agree, throwing a bunch of data at the wall is not going to help us, but being really determined around the data points that we need to look at that really show that that drive a reduction in crime is where we should be focused.
I recently held a large staff meeting with my operations branch team, and at the end of the meeting, one of the command officers, I greatly appreciated, he stood up when he heard my vision, what I was talking about, and he looked and he said, "We have a healthy degree of skepticism about you, Chief." And I appreciated that candor and that willingness, and I will say the same about, being a part of LIPSIC again, frankly. I was part of it off and on for a few years. Recognize that I've been gone. I tell people in the organization, what do I need to know because I haven't been here for 4 years? But what do I bring because I haven't been here for 4 years? And there's a lot that I don't know because I haven't been here for 4 years, but as somebody who's been involved and engaged in the community for the last 4 years, not in a role as seated at this table, I have a lot of concerns and a lot of disappointments and frustrations, not because of anybody's singular performance or leadership, just overall the love that I have for the city and for the community, et cetera. So that's a motivating factor for me to come back. So for me, selfishly, as I think of going forward, is we've heard, and I think Erica did a great job, and the sheriff as well, having some clear, defined goals. And then that skepticism lies with, and we have a responsibility to figure out how to do it together. And frankly, we just haven't done that well over the years. Looking at this, there's one slide for PPB, there's multiple slides for the county and for the state, et cetera. But yet, the reference being we need to get more PPB, more engaged, et cetera. We're a big part of this conversation. So it's, I think just a recognition. We talk about silos, we talk about collaboration. For me to really, stay and lean in and be engaged is to have a hopefulness that we're going to be able to do that differently, because I don't think we've done that very well, frankly, at least both from an outward appearance and then also from my personal experience. And I own some of that as well. As the chief of police of Portland Police Bureau, I'm saying that's a responsibility I have as well. So that's not to be taken for the table as a whole. I'm in that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I think many people would welcome the engagement of PPB into these conversations and into how we can do that work together and have it be more than one slide, right? Anyone else? Judge Albright.
Hi, I'd like to make an announcement. The chief, the Criminal Justice Advisory Committee is a statutory entity that was traditionally run by the chief criminal judge. It's undergone some transition over the years. LIPSIC is a corollary to that, also a statutory entity required to meet, and that is this body meets as a governing body, public meeting. The CJAC meeting is advisory. When I first joined when I first came on as chief criminal judge, the CJAC meeting was in transition. It wasn't happening at all. And so it had totally been folded into other meetings like the Justice Reinvestment meeting. So having a statutory duty to have the meeting, I got it set back up again, but it never found its rhythm, I would say. And we ultimately, because we were having so many other meetings with COVID and the pretrial meetings and the Safety and Justice Challenge, there were just so many spokes where we were meeting talking about different things. So we went to quarterly meetings, and it's become more of a sort of like we come together and announce our big things, but we're not really meeting and collaborating in CJAC currently. So this is actually a great moment of transition, not just from me to Judge Greenlit, but also CJAC is going to be meeting monthly. He'll be announcing we all decided that at one of our last meetings, and he wasn't even there. But CJAC is going to be meeting monthly, and that is where, our obligations with COVID are mostly done, pretrials mostly done, all those big projects that we had going on are kind of at their closing point. So this is a good time to get back to that just regular rhythm of meeting, collaborating, talking, and having CJAC serve as its function and then LIPSIC serving its function. So just wanted to announce that.
Thank you, Judge. We're just about time, so I do want to thank again all the agencies and departments and analysts who presented today, who shared this. Thank you all for the thoughtful conversation. I think this is a really good way to set us up. LIPSIC normally doesn't meet in December, so we won't have a meeting in December, but we will see everyone again virtually in January. I do really appreciate the efforts people made to be here in person, though. I think we will have at least a few of these in the next calendar year back in person for a chance for us to connect and engage in this way. So I look forward to seeing all of you